Breaking news, President Trump reportedly ordered acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney to hold back military aid for Ukraine for at least a week before his phone call with the Ukrainian president. Now, that was first reported in the Washington Post. Much more in a moment. That is what we're hearing from the president of the United States. It's right out of the Trump playbook. Unsubstantiated smears, ignoring the facts, and leaving himself just enough wiggle room. Listen to what the president said over the past few days about his conversation with the president of Ukraine, a conversation so concerning, a whistleblower is trying to make a complaint about it to Congress, a complaint the White House and the DOJ are trying to bury.
Did you discuss Joe Biden, his son, or his family with the leader?
It doesn't matter what I discussed, but I will say this. Somebody ought to look into Joe Biden's statement because it was disgraceful. The conversation I had was largely congratulatory, was largely corruption, all of the corruption taking place, was largely the fact that we don't want our people, like Vice President Biden and his son, creating to the corruption already in the Ukraine. If you don't talk about corruption, why would you give money to a country that you think is corrupt? One of the reasons the new president got elected is he was going to stop corruption. So it's very important that on occasion you speak to somebody about corruption. Very important. There was no pressure put on them whatsoever. I put no pressure on them whatsoever. I could have. I think it would probably, possibly have been okay if I did.
Probably, possibly would have been okay if you did? Well, quite a progression there over just a few days. It doesn't matter what I discussed, but corruption. Why would you give money to a country you think is corrupt? I didn't put pressure on them, but I could have, and it would have been probably, possibly okay. Let's not forget, Ukraine needs our help to fight Russia, which has already seized Crimea. And then there's the president's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Sources telling CNN that the president was pretty disinterested in Ukraine. Well, that is until Giuliani got him fired up with his efforts to investigate Biden. A source close to the White House says the president has been seething for months and that Giuliani has been, quote, egging him on. In early May, he planned a trip to Kiev to urge the then president-elect of Ukraine to pursue an investigation of Biden. Giuliani telling the New York Times, quote, "We're not meddling in an election, we're meddling in an investigation." Then saying, quote, "There's nothing illegal about it. Somebody could say it's improper." And then saying he planned to urge Ukraine to continue the investigation, quote, "because that information will be very, very helpful to my client." But one day later, Giuliani abruptly canceling his trip to the Ukraine, saying this.
I'm not going to go because I think I'm walking into a group of people that are enemies of the president.
Well, why would it be helpful to his client? Because he's trying to get a foreign government, in this case Ukraine, to investigate the Democratic frontrunner and his son, all the while holding up $250 million in promised aid from Congress in the meantime. And by the way, it's over the objections of members of both parties in Congress. Now, I thought we had collectively agreed that asking a foreign nation for opposition research is a problem, but more on that later. And then, of course, was Giuliani's very, very heated exchange with Chris Cuomo just last week. In the space of less than a minute, denying, then admitting he asked Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. Some would say the who ordered the code red moment.
Did you ask the Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden?
No, actually, I didn't. I asked the Ukraine to investigate the allegations that there was interference in the election of 2016 by the Ukrainians for the benefit of Hillary Clinton, for which there already is a court finding.
You never asked anything about Hunter Biden. You never asked anything about Joe Biden.
The only thing I asked about
prosecutor.
Joe Biden is to get to the bottom of how it was that Lutsenko, who was appointed, dismissed the case against Antak.
So you did ask Ukraine to look into Joe Biden?
Of course I did.
You just said you didn't.
Now, a lot of this could be cleared up if the White House would release the transcript of that call. But the president, well, he says this.
Perhaps you'll see it, perhaps you won't see that. It depends on what we want to do.
One Trump advisor telling CNN, quote, "This is a serious problem for us." He admitted doing it. But a source tells CNN's Gloria Borger the president isn't bothered. He's not worried, and incredibly, he likes Joe Biden. Well, he sure has a funny way of showing that he likes him. But now, as I said, a lot of this could be cleared up if the White House would release the transcript of that call. Maybe that will happen right after the president releases his tax returns. And let's remember, the intelligence community inspector general suggested to the House Intel Committee, behind closed doors, that the whistleblower's complaint raised concerns about multiple actions. Now, we don't know whether all of them involve the president. We don't know because, as I said, the White House and the DOJ are trying to bury the complaint. And that leaves the president and his allies free to repeat unsubstantiated allegations and smears, right out of that old Trump playbook. Lots to discuss now with Evan McMullen, Juliet Kayyem, and Max Boot, who is the author of The Corrosion of Conservatism, Why I Left the Right. Thank you all for being here tonight. I can't think of a better panel for this discussion. Let me start with you for a second, Max. What is your reaction to the breaking news now from the Washington Post?
Well, the timing is highly damning, Laura. I mean, this is a pretty clear case of President Trump trying to extort a foreign leader to interfere in a U.S. election on his behalf. And the fact that he put a hold on this aid to Ukraine a week before, calling up Zelensky and then badgering him 8 times to investigate Joe Biden, the Democratic frontrunner. I mean, that is fishy as hell. That is highly suspicious. I cannot imagine an innocent explanation for this, and the spin coming from the White House that Donald Trump cares about corruption in Ukraine is just laughable. Remember, Donald Trump is pals with some of the most corrupt dictators in the world, people like Erdogan, Putin, and Sisi. The notion that he cares about corruption is laughable. What he cares about is framing his leading political rival on trumped up, so to speak, charges of corruption. And that's what he was doing, misusing the power of the presidency. And this seems to me the straw that finally has broken the camel's back. And after hesitating on impeachment, Democrats are finally realizing this guy really needs to be impeached if the facts are as they seem to be, because otherwise he will continue violating the law in order to stay in office. Well,
Max, I wonder if everyone has that same camel threshold you do. It doesn't sound like everyone's on board yet. But Evan, listen to this reporting. The administration officials were instructed to tell lawmakers that the delays were part of an interagency process, but to give them no additional information, a pattern that continued for nearly 2 months until the White House released the funds on the night of September 11th. Evan, does that sound like the officials were told to lie to lawmakers about why the aid was being held back?
Well, it does sound very suspicious on its face, but I think the dates here really matter, going back to the timeline here. So they released the funds on September 11th, or the eve of September 11th. But what happened a couple of days before that? Well, the IG, the intelligence community IG, had reported to Adam Schiff, had gone around his bosses who had decided they weren't going to share the whistleblower complaint with Congress. He had gone around his bosses on September 9th to inform Congress that there was the complaint. So you can imagine, after the administration had told other officials, senior administration officials had told others in the executive branch that they were to sort of offer very little details about why the hold was there. That was maintained for almost 2 months. Then all of a sudden, on September 10th or 11th, they go and they release those funds. Well, I think it's because there was a moment where they realized, oh my goodness, now Adam Schiff and the House Democrats understand what the ploy is here, what the scheme is, and we got to get rid of this and we got to move this money. So they held it as long as they could, and when they got caught, they moved it. That's my read.
Juliet, I'm dying to hear your thoughts on this. And also, 3 senior officials, Juliet, spoke out to the Post for this story. Why would they do that? Are they worried about how bad this could be for the president, the whistleblower? I mean, this can't be the president's only concern now, is it?
No, I mean, I think that the fear that you're starting to see out of the White House is twofold. One is some people were told to lie to Congress. And so people will start watching out for themselves because, as we know, Donald Trump has no loyalty. I also think that there's another issue here. Very few people know what's in the whistleblower report. Maybe perhaps Donald Trump and the people along the chain of command. And I think that's why Donald Trump has all of us focused on this stupid transcript idea, which I think is just absolutely ridiculous and no one should talk about it anymore. It is the whistleblower's account of a variety of instances that Donald Trump may not know what's in that. In other words, there's probably worse stuff in that than in the single phone call to Ukraine. And so we need to focus on what is in fact in the whistleblower account, because that is likely to have all the connective tissue that we're sort of wondering about or that we're trying to connect the dots on.